Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and I'm joined by my colleagues over at the Hockey Writers, Shane Seney, and of course, our web producer extraordinaire / Maple Leafs fan for the time being, Matthew Zator. As you can tell, Alex Hobson is not with us anymore. He has gone on to bigger and better things over at TLN. We wish him the best of luck. As always, he was a great panelist here on Maple Leafs Lounge. But before we get into the show, Shane, how are you doing? Also, for one thing before you start talking, big welcome back to Shane coming off the IR after jaw surgery. We were wishing you the best of luck and a speedy recovery, and so glad you're back, buddy.
Yeah, it was tough to watch the playoffs and not be able to say anything because I wanted to come on here so bad and just rant, as I sometimes do. But excited to be back, guys. I am went back to the golf course today and started talking Leafs with a couple of buddies, which I know there's a joke in there somewhere. So I'm happy to be back, and let's talk some hockey.
Golf and Maple Leaf joke. I wonder what that could be, but everyone in the comment section, you could decipher that for your own. Matt, you are back on the Maple Leafs Lounge as a Maple Leafs fan just for the offseason, I guess, because, until the draft and offseason kicks in, but how are you doing?
Doing good. Like said, Alex, good luck in his next endeavor, but obviously sad that he's not on the show anymore, but we've got a new writer starting, going to be coming on the show next week. So stay tuned for that. So we're going to have some new faces and some new discussions. So, but doing good overall.
Absolutely. And as we want to kick off the show, obviously the big talk is who is going to be the next GM of the Maple Leafs. We already talked about the whole Dubas-Shanahan debacle last week. You could go back and check our takes on that. But the work is starting to try and figure out who is going to be leading the charge and building the roster for next season, the season after that, and for other years to come. At the moment, it seems like Brad Treliving is the favorite / front runner / betting favorite, if you're doing bets on stuff like that, to be the next GM. Shane, I'm going to come over to you. Obviously, the Maple Leafs had a direction going with Kyle Dubas, young, outside the box thinking, analytics and everything like that. Obviously, Brad Treliving has been in the league longer. He's had more experience. He does have that bite sort of thing that he's not afraid to make a big move. Is this the right move, or is this kind of a downgrade for the Maple Leafs, given what they had with Dubas?
I think anyone's a downgrade from what they had with Dubas, regardless of who comes in, to be honest. I think because Shanahan kind of put his head out there for Dubas, who was inexperienced, wasn't even winning at the OHL level before, eventually taking over in Toronto. But I think because of that, he'll go with more experience this time, just maybe the safe play. But Treliving, it's tough because it's going to be a hard situation for anybody coming in to save the day and potentially blowing everything up. So he's got experience when it comes to the Matthew Tkachuk trade, Johnny Gaudreau leaving, big franchise altering summers. So I think that he's a good guy for the job. I'm not a big fan of some of his signings. I mean, Matt knows this well. He ended up signing 3 or 4 Canucks that one summer, and just weird random things. And a couple of his contracts I really like Elias Lindholm's, his contract out of being an RFA. So you see that kind of stuff and you get a little bit excited, but at the end of the day, I'm really surprised how it all shook out with Kyle Dubas. And now that I also write for the Pittsburgh Penguins, so I'm a little bit selfishly happy about maybe how things will turn out. But at the end of the day, it's a tough situation for the Leafs.
Yeah, obviously, the big thing in Leafs Nation right now is, anything other than, like Shane said, anything other than Dubas is a downgrade. But given the names on the market are like linked to the Maple Leafs or GMs with experience. I know there's talk about, Peter Chiarelli, Mark Bergevin, GMs that have had a controversial past because of the moves they made and downgrades that they made with their team. Some success, but not a whole lot. Is Treliving, kind of the one that still separates himself from those guys that have had better success, even though that he himself has had difficult situations to try and manage around?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, Treliving, like Shane said, has had success with getting out of tough situations. And, the Tkachuk trade was a big one. I didn't think he was going to be able to get out of that with much. And getting Huberdeau, even though he didn't have a very good season, was a pretty good haul to get for Tkachuk, even though, I mean, it's hard to look at when Tkachuk's putting up 100+ points and then what he's doing in the playoffs. But, Huberdeau can still be a 100-point guy. He was in Florida. He could bounce back. So, I mean, that deal alone, I think, puts a lot of positivity of what he can do. But as for like some of the signings, I know the Canucks, they were like the Calgary Canucks for a bit. I mean, I think he seemed to just love signing Canucks. So if he ends up being in Toronto, I'm going to start writing some articles on him getting some Canucks over there. But it's interesting. I mean, I think Treliving is still probably the best fit at this point. I wouldn't go with Chiarelli. I wouldn't go with Bergevin. I feel their past is kind of a little bit more murky than Treliving's, and Treliving's have been able to get out of different situations, and this is going to be an interesting situation coming in with the Maple Leafs, because there's going to be some expectations for some big moves because they can't run it back with the same group. I mean, I think it's impossible to do. You have to do something, and I think Treliving's probably the best equipped to do that.
Matt foreshadowing later on in the show, but we will get to another topic that revolves around that later on. But I do agree with you that he's not afraid to pull off some big moves. And like we saw last season, and I think, Shane, going to your point about like having to deal out some bad contracts, I think he was in that tough spot because we kind of figured that Johnny Gaudreau was not going to re-sign. It kind of seemed like he was on his way out with Matthew Tkachuk on. Obviously, he probably would have loved to have had both, but the situation didn't play out. And I think that's why signing Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri to those contracts that aren't starting to look great right now kind of may throw a lot of people off. But at the same time, Matt said he did sign Jacob Markstrom. He was having some, up and down seasons with Vancouver. He's come into his own as a very steady top 10, top 5 goaltender, if you want to throw him into that category or go a little bit above and beyond. And even bringing in Mackenzie Weegar, a guy that's, was a top 2 player on the Florida Panthers, a top 2 defender, coming in. And, I thought he still looked great with the Calgary Flames this season. Obviously, we're seeing what he can do on the ice, helping Team Canada win a gold medal. Hopefully that builds his confidence for the following season. So, and even looking at his draft record too, obviously most of his picks have come in the first round that have started to pan out. Matt Coronado, you've been high on him. Jacob Pelletier starting to come around, but there's even Dustin Wolf having a strong season in the AHL. So, his draft record does start to show a little bit, which is a good confidence booster. But at the same time, some of his moves in the NHL, hit or miss, but I think that's attributed to what he's been dealt with to try and work things around. And I agree with both of you that maybe at the moment, while I would still prefer someone else, we will get to that later on about potential options. But at the moment, he is in my top 3 of who I'd love to see try and lead this team at the helm for the future.
Just quick too, the whole Johnny Gaudreau situation wasn't his fault. Daryl Sutter called out Gaudreau in the playoffs for not scoring, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it had nothing to do with Treliving. His hands were tied. It had everything to do with Sutter there. So, again, tough situation, but I thought I'd mention that.
Absolutely. And now he's not head coach anymore. After players have put in trade requests, they can him. The trade requests got rescinded. They can't be a coincidence, right? But as we talked about the head or the one leading the pack in the GM race, how about some internal options? Obviously, it's kind of very limited with what the Maple Leafs have Obviously, maybe they were trying to groom Jason Spezza as a potential general manager himself. We saw that he was, shadowing Dubas quite a bit. But I want to get like an either or take. Obviously, two main ones in the Maple Leaf system are obviously Brandon Pridham, Ryan Hardy, who has been managing both the Toronto Marlies and Newfoundland Growlers, a little bit tongue-tied there, in the ECHL, but also being assistant general manager with the Maple Leafs. So you have him. You even have a potential candidate, Dr. Haley Wickenheiser, who has been, in the organization for about a year or two, or along that line. So you have three options. I just want to get your take, Matt. I want to start with you. Who do you think would be an ideal internal option for this team?
It's funny. I was going to mention Haley Wickenheiser. I think it may be too soon for her to take over as GM, but I think down the line she could be a good option. But as of right now, I think Brandon Pridham is your guy. The way he's been able to manage the cap as being the capologist or cap expert guy, he's done a great job. I mean, the Maple Leafs have been cap strapped for years. I mean, to be able to deal
6-7 years,
yeah, with all those big contracts, and they've been able to navigate it. Be it moving guys, they moved so many different guys at the trade deadline to be able to add what they needed and be able to be under the cap. That was just expert. I don't know if it was all him, but he was definitely involved. So, I think he could definitely be, the most ideal internal candidate at this point. But I watch out for Wickenheiser though down the line, because I think she's going to be a really big part. Even though she may not be GM now, I think she could even potentially be an assistant GM at some point here.
Shane, do you agree with that, or do you have someone else in mind?
No, I agree there. I think because it's, there's just so many contracts coming, so many big extensions to be had, and all the work that Pridham's done in the past, I think he would be, out of those three, the most ideal or most suited for the job. It won't be long before, Dr. Wickenheiser is, running a front office, and awesome. That'd be great to see. And I just think it, like Matt said, it might be a couple of years away, but to me, it just would make the most sense if you stay internal to promote Pridham from within.
Yeah, I agree. And it's good to note that Haley Wickenheiser actually is an assistant general manager with the Maple Leafs. I believe she was director of player personnel or something to that effect early on before she got promoted. So she does have that assistant general manager experience, similar to Jason Spezza. I think they were trying to groom, like I said, they were trying to groom him as well. But because they're kind of lower in terms of, the pecking order of things, maybe Pridham does have that advantage, obviously, with the salary cap. But even Ryan Hardy, I wouldn't count him out as well, given the fact that what he was able to do as a scout for the Boston Bruins, general manager for the Chicago Steel. We know how great he is at evaluating talent and building that USAHL team, bringing in the likes of Owen Power, and the list goes on and on about all these top prospects coming up in the system for other NHL teams. But yeah, it's hard not to count out Haley, whether it is with the Maple Leafs or even with another team down the line. I think she would do a fantastic job, given how well she knows the game and how well she is at developing talent as well. So again, all three have their merits. I want to try and break I was going to say break the tie, but it's 2-0 at this point right now. But I'm gonna draw the line at 33% for each one. I would probably give that slight edge to Pridham, given what he's able to do with the cap, with this core, and even before, because even the David Clarkson contract, getting rid of that, long-term injury reserve, Stefan Robida, all those other deals. I think he has worked wonders to try and get this team cap compliant when he needs to, and what he's able to do is just absolutely phenomenal. Now we went from internal candidates. Now let's go to some dark horses. Obviously, there's always one that could probably just pop out of nowhere and say, yeah, this is going to be our guy. Shane, I want to come to you first. Who do you think would be an ideal under the radar move as the general manager?
I don't know if it's necessarily under the radar, but to me, the wild card would be Doug Armstrong from the St. Louis Blues. I believe he was just over in Latvia with Team Canada, with the World Championships there. And obviously that was a great result for that team. But the Blues have been around as far as, playoff contention goes now for a decade or so. And while it's already been shot down, obviously when there's smoke, there's usually a little bit of fire. So I think his name will still be linked as we wait for, these next couple of weeks, maybe, to see what gets announced. But to me, it would be Armstrong from the Blues.
Absolutely. And he is under contract too. So it would be interesting to see if he would, or if the organization would allow him to explore those opportunities or an option elsewhere, because he has a Stanley Cup to his resume, because he built that team with the St. Louis Blues. They were down in the lower end standings, but managed to claw their way back, make the playoffs, make the Stanley Cup, and win it all. Matt, who would your ideal under the radar candidate be?
This is probably going to get me some bad comments in the comment section. I haven't really heard of his name a lot lately. He's kind of come up sometimes. Mike Gillis. He's, as much as everyone kind of disses him in Vancouver, I think he was probably one of the most innovative GMs that the Canucks ever had. And he was one that kind of brought in different things, maybe some little hokey things that people kind of thought. But, I've heard in the past, and Kevin Bieksa said this, I believe, on Hockey Night in Canada not that long ago, that he thinks Gillis was probably the biggest reason why the Canucks were so successful at that point in 2011, the 2010s there, where they won President's trophies and stuff. So I don't know if it's going to be with the Maple Leafs, but I believe Gillis is going to be in the front office. Not that, it probably will be again, because I agree. I think he was probably one of the more innovative guys that kind of tried different things that, sometimes worked, sometimes didn't, but he'd be an interesting guy to kind of just come out of the woodwork at some point here.
I don't know. I'm going to go a different route, and it's kind of the same route that, highly analytic driven and everything like that. But I don't know if this is an under the radar move, because he really hasn't been connected to them. But because the Pittsburgh Penguins were in on him, and now they said that he's not in the running anymore, I'm still at the forefront for Eric Tulsky, given what he was able to do with the Carolina Hurricanes, moving up from the analytics department and moving up to the front office and building his resume up. From the scouting to the player analysis and everything like that. I think he's done a fantastic job helping build this Carolina Hurricane team. And even though they got swept in the conference finals, this is still a very dangerous and lethal team. Obviously, they could have used some help from Andrei Svechnikov. They could have had Max Pacioretty be very healthy and, maintain that. I believe it was a goal per game rate. I don't even know. I believe he had like 3 and 5.
He was on a roll.
He was on a roll before he got injured again. And that was just, a little bit disappointing as well. But given what he was able to do and help build that team, I think he's someone that should not be counted out. Yes, analytics driven. Yes, kind of like Kyle Dubas, but still a very smart mind. And this is just recent too, a report from David Alter from the Hockey News that Doug Wilson is a name that should not be counted out, because apparently his name has been on the surface, and what he was able to do with the San Jose Sharks too, down, I believe it was the 2017 conference Stanley Cup final that they made it, just losing out to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'll have to go back and double check that, but his name apparently has come up as a, potential option as well. So we'll see how that one plays out. Again, he hasn't been in the front office role for about a couple seasons now, but it's interesting to see Doug Wilson's name pop up as well.
I'd be really curious about him because Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau's relationship with him just over the years, and how much Matthews and Marner really trust and have that friendship with Marleau and Thornton. So I wonder if there's a dynamic that can be played there to keep those guys around town if Wilson does show up.
Absolutely. And it wasn't in 2017. That was the Nashville Predators. But I do remember that there was one year where the Pittsburgh Penguins made it to the Cup final. They played San Jose. It was 2016. Okay. 16. It was one of those back-to-back years for the Penguins that they made the Stanley Cup final. Again, San Jose Sharks fell a little bit short, but I believe Wilson was at the helm for that team as well. Before we start with the second half of our show, here's a quick word from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back with the second portion of our show here on the Maple Leafs Lounge. And we went from the first half being all about the GM candidates, who we would like to see. Now let's go to the player and the rosters, because it was only recent in a 32 thoughts post from Elliot Friedman on Sportsnet that Corey Perry is a name who is likely to test the free agent market. And obviously, once again, the Maple Leafs are being tied to Corey Perry. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting, because Corey Perry appeared to be on the Maple Leafs radar back in 2021 during that bubble season. However, they elected to sign Wayne Simmons instead. Corey Perry signs with Montreal. And then Corey Perry, the villain kind of thing, comes out with him, scoring key goals, being tough to play against, signs in Tampa Bay, same thing happens. Now he's becoming a free agent. Shane, is this the year where, despite Corey Perry getting up in age, he's still proven to be an effective fourth liner? Is this the year where maybe they sign him to a league minimum contract similar to what they did for Spezza?
Yeah, I think so. Why not? They got no forward sign. So they might as well bring in a guy, fourth line. He'll play 10 to 12 minutes. He'll probably, draw a penalty, might take a roughing penalty, could score a late goal, and he'll get some second power play minutes. He's never been a good skater. So when you look at him now and you're like, well, he's slow. He's slowing down. He's never been fast. So it's not like he's not used to that. He's a veteran player that is smart. He gets in the right positions. He uses his body well. He's got great hands and tight. So to me, you know what? They're going to have some cap space. They're going to need to fill out the fourth line. Yes, they have, some Marlies guys that'll come up, but why not? Just do it. He's interested. He spends his, a lot of time in London golfing with Muzzin anyway. So why not just bring him up, get it over with? And if it doesn't work out, you can say, oh, well, you should have signed him 3 years ago. And if it does work out, you could say, well, you should have signed him 3 years ago.
There you go. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. Matt, obviously Shane mentioned, potential fourth line options could be from the Marlies, but would this be a great stepping stone for them to try and learn under Corey Perry? Obviously not the quickest, as Shane mentioned, not the quickest player, but someone to, learn that killer instinct mentality that this team is lacking, and even the fourth line lacked at certain points during the playoffs, because Zach Aston-Reese, he was signed in to be an anchor on the fourth line, was sitting most of the time in the playoffs. They went 11-7. So how would this impact the fourth line going forward?
He's a perfect fourth line guy. I mean, he's a guy that can be a third line guy too. I mean, he also jumped up into the top 6 at times in Tampa. I mean, he's still got that scoring touch. I mean, you don't lose that. He's never, like Shane said, he's never been the fastest guy. He's always been a slower guy. He does all his work around the net. Still so tough to play against. So much experience with him being in Anaheim of how annoying he is to play against. So I mean, he's probably the ideal fourth line guy at this point in his career. Like you say, he can still score those 10 to I believe he still has 10 to 15 goals in a regular season, and can score in the playoffs. And be that tough guy that, like you said, the young guys can learn from. He's been around the block a few times, won a cup, been to Stanley Cup finals probably, till last year for the last 3 seasons. So he's got a ton of playoff experience and a lot that can be passed around to the young guys. So like I say, that's perfect signing for his part in the career. I think he's found the fountain of youth too. I mean, not as much as Joe Pavelski, but man, I mean, it just seems like he can still play the game at a pretty high level, even though he's not scoring 50 goals anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being that net front presence too, that's going to go a long way because the Maple Leafs kind of shied away from that in the series against the Florida Panthers, where they weren't crashing the net, getting those opportunities like they were against Tampa Bay. And, Corey Perry was doing that effectively, whether he got points early on or whether he didn't later on. That fourth line was still a factor and still a thorn in the side of the Maple Leafs. So to have him on, kind of like Noel Acciari too, he's a player that you hate to play against, but you want on your team. And the fact that maybe he's kind of been that villain the past few years is this could be the year where maybe he comes over, helps the team out, and provides something that they didn't have before. Fourth line energy, grit, competitive edge. And you know what? That the experience too. We talk about experience too. He's a guy that shows it every single time on the ice, whether Shane, like you said, no matter where he is in the lineup, top six, third line, fourth line, this is a guy that can do it all, and he knows what his job is going to be right now. So I would love to see him take that Jason Spezza type contract and be an anchor on that fourth line. Moving on to our next point, obviously, a lot of speculation is coming about the core four after Dubas was let go, or they both the team and Dubas decided to part ways. Then all the trade speculation from the core four coming in, even before that even happened, you wanted to try and make a move with the core four to try and get this team moving because it didn't seem like everything was working out for them. So our good friend over at the Hockey Raiders, Jim Parsons, came out with a great piece. Maple Leafs could be target for Flames in Titanic-like trade. Obviously, he goes on to give his take about Elias Lindholm. I want to get your take. Matt, I want to come to you first. What would your ideal trade? And, this is, probably asking a little bit too much, but what would your ideal core four trade be for the Maple Leafs to try and shake things up if they were to go down that route of the Matthew Tkachuk deal last season?
It's a tough one. I mean, that Lindholm one does make sense. I think of the four guys, I think Nylander's probably the guy that will move. I mean, it'll be hard to move Matthews and Marner, and especially Marner because he's got quite a few years left on his contract at big money. I mean, Nylander's pretty manageable, even though he does have to be re-signed after this season. I don't know to what. I mean, it's probably going to be an upwards of 8-9 million if he puts up another 80+ point season. But I think it'll be probably centered around Nylander. I'm just not sure about what a target could be. I mean, there's just so much you can kind of look at. And that Tkachuk-Huberdeau trade kind of came out because Tkachuk wanted to leave. I mean, it was a different situation too. So I don't know what other forwards are kind of in that same realm where you can move a Nylander and what type of deal. It'll be a massive deal. I mean, to kind of figure out. So I'm dancing around it. I'm not really sure. I mean, on my perspective, what you'd actually want, because there'd be a lot of teams that would be interested, but a lot of teams would also have to have the cap space or moving a guy that has a similar salary in the same deal. And like I say, that's why that Lindholm deal kind of makes sense, because you're kind of moving two guys that are around the same salary. I don't know. So I'm just going to end it and just say, I'm not sure what type. It would be a complicated deal to get done.
Absolutely. Matt, what would, not Matt, Shane, what would, first off, Marner or Nylander, and what would your potential trade look like?
D, none of the above. To me, I keep the four and I move everybody else around them. I know I'm being stubborn, but like, they're not the problem, but that's a different conversation. But it's going to be, let's say one has to go. It's Nylander. There's just times he's frustrating sometimes, but he can also get back a ton right now. So to me, I would go Nylander to the Minnesota Wild for Joel Eriksson Ek. And reason being is because Minnesota they don't really have too much on the right wing. A lot of their players are either on left wing or center. They have Sam Steele, who's not easy for me to say with a frozen bottom lip, but he's kind of propelled himself to that number one center. And Joel Eriksson Ek is, a 70-point guy that's got lots of potential still. He's mid-20s, signed long-term to a great contract. So if you're the Leafs and you're moving out one of these guys, which again doesn't make sense, you're going to want to bring back a guy that's got a nice contract with some security and he's going to fill a hole. You can move Tavares to the left wing and slot Eriksson Ek into number 2 hole for the next 5 years behind Matthews, right? So that's a nice 1-2 combo if you ask me. So I would think something along those lines. And if it's not, maybe the Kings and maybe like you asked for Brant Clark and Quentin Byfield or I don't know. But Minnesota to me kind of makes sense, although I don't think dealing any of the 4 makes sense.
No, and that's understandable. Obviously, the Kings have a lot of draft capital. Even the Wild, every team out west seems to have a lot of draft capital, especially on the West Coast in California. I'm gonna not necessarily toot my own horn here, but in the article, it's mentioned fellow THW contributor Marner or Nylander, and first for Lindholm, maybe Anderson as well. I'm gonna say it out. You guys are in that channel. I propose that deal, and I am gonna say more so Marner. And obviously, I agree that Nylander is a more ideal or more attractive contract to move because it's so affordable, and how skilled he is and how much value he has there. If you were to trade Marner, and you would be getting Lindholm at 4.85 and Rasmus Anderson at 4.5. Anderson is signed for 2 more years after that, going to be a UFA in 26-27. But the big one is Elias Lindholm is going to be a UFA next season. He's probably going to ask for a bit of a raise. So maybe if you could try and get him in that 6-7 range as a number 2 center, but also I believe he can be played on the wing as well. So if you could try and shift him around, maybe that might be a little bit more ideal. Have him on the second line or even on the first line, what have you. And, he keep Nylander in the fold because they're both countrymen, both from Sweden. I think they would have some great chemistry right there. Even if I don't know how everyone's going to take this, but move Tavares to the third line if you have to as the center. It's not ideal to have an $11 million third line center, but you like the upside from Lindholm being that guy that could play in every single situation. Down year with 64 points, but if you could get him at 6-7 years as a reliable 2-way center that can do a lot of damage in all situations, plus Anderson, that to me is the equivalent to a Matthew Tkachuk trade. Now, Lindholm's not going to put as much points as Tkachuk, but the equivalent to Anderson and Weegar, which doesn't make sense as well because they already have Weegar and Anderson in the fold. Probably you trade one of them that is kind of like that as well. And I thought he had a really great breakout season. So I think that could be your big comparable to try and make a Matthew Tkachuk trade going back to Calgary Flames. So that's my standpoint. That's where I kind of view things as well. Again, with our trade proposals, I think that seems to be more, I would say a bit more realistic than some of the ones that I've seen on Twitter so far. So, yeah, maybe pat on the back for me. I don't know, but pat on the back to every one of you as well for giving the answers that you did as well, especially Shane and Matt. Obviously, it really is difficult to come up with trade proposals on the spot. So thank you so much for playing that little game. If you were, general manager of the Maple Leafs right there.
I played politician. I didn't give an answer.
I'm still waiting for the paycheck that comes with this.
If you think about it, maybe Shane went that same route too because he was being a little bit selfish. He said being a little bit selfish, wanting to keep the core 4 intact. So, both are in the neutral territory and totally understandable because if you do want to give them an extra run right now, I mean, Shanahan said that the core 4 is coming back, but if you do need to make a move, you have to make a move.
Yeah, and with that whole phone call thing, I just feel like because he did that and because he's hiring the GM directly and there's already been that power struggle kind of, exemplified within the market. So to me, if he's saying that and he's got control of who he's bringing in, those conversations to be like, this is where it stands because of me, I just don't see them going. So who knows? So the GM might come in, this is my master plan, what do you think? And he's convinced. So there's just interesting times. And I have my trip to Sweden booked for November, so I'm hoping they're all the core four is going to be there, or if not, maybe a homecoming for Elias Lindholm. Who knows?
Absolutely. That would definitely be something to see, especially for you, Shane. I hope everything does remain intact because, forking over good money for a trip to go to Sweden to watch those kind of games. So, yeah.
If they blow it up before this, you're going to want to hear from me because I'm going to have a few things to say.
An angry panelist / fan who wants his money back. That is for sure.
Exactly.
Moving on to our final topic right now. Obviously, offseason is going to be, or not necessarily in full swing for the Maple Leafs, but the rumors are swirling. The ideas are going out there. Shane, you came out with a piece on what you would like, or 5 moves the Maple Leafs need to do in the offseason. Obviously, you picked 5 good ones, but if there's one in there that really stands out, or if there's another one that didn't quite make the list, what is your ideal offseason move, or one that should be made?
Yeah, the 5 that I mentioned too was just kind of to kickstart the offseason. It was like these need to happen, then some more stuff can happen. And to me, like priority 1 is getting Matt Murray off the books. There's no need for him to be here anymore. Joseph Wall showed that he is capable of handling the brightest lights. Ilya Samsonov's gonna, he's an RFA. They don't have much leverage. He'll resign. So to me, Murray's 4.68 needs to go. I think the San Jose Sharks are a decent possibility when it comes to a trade. But there's going to be a very small market there when it comes to a trade. But the buyout only costs the Leafs just over, I think, like $675,000 this year, or 2023, 24. And then another $2 million the next. So not huge. Obviously, $2 million coming on while Matthews and Nylander potentially are getting the raises. Not ideal, but you saved a little bit of money on McCabe's trade, so everything balances out. But to me, first move, Matt Murray, buyout window if a trade can't be worked out at the draft, and you start with an extra, almost $5 million on your cap.
Absolutely. It's worth noting that according to Cap Friendly, the Sharks have a projected cap space of over 14 million. So there is a possibility that if the team wants to, build up salary for just one more year, even if you don't retain salary, Matt Murray for one more year seems like a good possibility to go out west. Matt, what is your ideal offseason move, or one move that the Maple Leafs should make this offseason?
Yeah, that Matt Murray one's a big one. I would agree with that. I'll throw out, even though I don't want this to happen because I want him to come back to the Canucks, but Luke Schenn, re-sign him, because I think he fit in perfectly on that top pairing with Morgan Riley, and having a full season with him, I think that would really help Riley out. Like I said, I don't want it to happen because I don't want him to not come back to Vancouver, and he seems to be flip-flopping between the two. From his interviews here. So, but yeah, that'd be my first one. And then do anything you can do to clear cap space so that you can have some more flexibility to get some guys to kind of fill out the roster.
Absolutely. And I think my big one is going to be, and this is all depending if they make that big trade or not, is make that first round pick count. If they hang on to that, obviously I could go, free agency, trade, what have you. But if they make that pick count, there are a lot of possible options of players that have high upside in that, late first, early second that they could probably take, or even trade down and get 2 second-round picks if there's someone that they do like. That kind of falls down into the second round. But, Matt, me with all the prospects. I'm big on Tom Verlander. Grayson Sachin is up there as a potential target. Carson Raykov is a name that might be a bit of a reach, but also Gavin Brindley, Kasper Halton are players that stand out of players or prospects that they need in their system that have, high scale, high impact. Haltonen with his physicality and his booming shots. So there are a lot of options that they could take with that pick, and they need to make it count because you haven't had a first rounder since 2020, and moving those picks, try and be competitive. I think you got to make it count right now. And the fact that you got one back in that Rasmussen Sandy trade, I think you have to make that count no matter what.
I'm a little bit, I'm kind of sad because at the draft, you'd always get close to the Leafs pick, and then they go, "We have a trade to
Trade to announce.
So
Yeah.
I always got excited because you think something big's going to happen, and they, move down a couple spots and get rid of a bad contract. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they can do. Prospects isn't necessarily my cup of tea. I leave that for our guy Peter here, because who's the absolute best on our side at doing that. So I'm curious to see what happens, but it's nice that Dubas did pull off that deal, just so they do have an extra bullet in the holster there. So we'll see what shakes out in June.
Funny you should mention that. When I was at the draft in Montreal, when the Maple Leafs were coming up, things were taking a little bit longer than expected. And that's when we realized, okay, they're moving that pick no matter what. Because I was hoping that they would take either Philip Mejar or Owen Beck with that pick, because I believe they were high on their list if they had to take somebody with that first. But they moved down to the second, took Fraser Minton, looking great in his return to the Memorial Cup, scored a great power play goal. They need more Fraser Mintons, a lot of smarts, a lot of intensity, a lot of compete, which is why keep that first pick, is you could find another Fraser Minton, not necessarily like kind of a clone with that mentality and skill set. So let's hope that happens, and hopefully they don't make that trade, because I want to see a Maple Leaf pick in this first round.
Gavin Brindley would be a great pick.
I'm rooting for you.
Absolutely. Gavin Brindley is up there as well. Well, that is it. That is all for this episode of Maple Leafs Lounge. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out the Hockey Writers for all of the great content from all of our fantastic writers, from Matt and even Shane with the Maple Leafs as well, Matt with the Canucks. Be sure to check out our prospect coverage. There's a lot going on there, and the offseason coverage is in full swing. So you don't want to miss any of the coverage from Matt, you should probably, I was going to say three for all three of us Maple Leaf coverage. Matt, you should start making some Maple Leaf posts at this point, because you're kind of like a regular on here.
I got to write about the Red Wings too, because I'm
always in the bullpen, always ready to, we just give them the old tap.
Exactly. Yeah. But you can check out Matt's coverage of the Canucks and prospects, Shane with the Maple Leafs. Again, fantastic stuff going on over at the Hockey Writers right now. Once again, that is it for this episode. For Matthew Zator and Shane Seney, I am Peter Baracchini, and we'll see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.